For decades, UK policy has operated on a mechanical assumption. Interventions produce direct and proportional outcomes. You apply a force, and society moves in a predictable direction. This is the standard linear evaluation model. Track inputs, measure mechanisms, record outputs. That works for logistical tasks, like building bridges, but fails for wicked problems. Policy domains are complex adaptive systems, dense networks where variables react simultaneously. The UK government now requires this systemic perspective for all formal policy assessments. The 2020 Magenta Book Supplementary Guide provides the official mandate for evaluators to move past linear assumptions in interconnected environments. Evaluators are now tasked with mapping the dynamic architectural properties of the system rather than treating social environments as static. Using rigid linear metrics to evaluate an adapting network guarantees you will misinterpret why a policy actually succeeded or failed. Within this network model, we can isolate the first defining property of a complex system: adaptation. Human agents within a social system learn and react strategically to new rules. When a new target is introduced, these agents draw new connections to bypass the intervention. This behavior was observed within the National Health Service during the 1990s. The government paired additional investment with strict performance targets, intending to reduce the time patients waited for care. In many instances, hospitals introduced new screening processes and altered reporting practices to satisfy the numerical targets. By adjusting to the parameters of the metric, administrators met the mandated benchmarks without necessarily reducing the real-world wait times for patients. A complex system adjusts. Static metrics fail because the human subjects are actively modifying their behavior in response to being measured. Data showing a successfully met policy target can actually be evidence of system evasion rather than genuine impact. Outcomes in these networks often curve back as inputs for the next cycle, creating feedback loops. A negative loop suppresses interventions to maintain the status quo. A positive loop accelerates change, compounding a small intervention into an exponential reaction. Reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone National Park triggered these cascading effects across the entire ecosystem. The wolves reduced the elk population, which allowed valleys to revegetate. This vegetation stabilized the soil and provided timber for beavers, eventually altering the physical flow of the rivers. Because of these feedback mechanisms, a policy's final impact is often disproportionate to its initial input, either muted by the system or significantly magnified. Standard evaluation often treats all participants or organizations as equal data points in a sample size. A broader view of the network shows that connectivity is concentrated in specific hubs. A hub has disproportionate influence. Because of its position, a single well-connected entity can champion a policy rollout or act as a veto player that blocks it. Large-scale political organizations often act as structural hubs, creating a gravity well that directs legislative behavior. Resistance from a single hub can cause an entire systemic intervention to collapse, regardless of how the rest of the network reacts. If an evaluator fails to map these specific structural hubs, they will misunderstand where the power to enact change resides. These networks settle into self-correcting states called domains of stability. This explains why small interventions often fail. The system lacks the energy to escape its historical valley, and gravity pulls it back to its original state. Altering the system's architecture requires enough force to reach a critical threshold, a tipping point. Crossing this threshold triggers a non-linear shift. The system leaves its old basin and locks into a new domain of stability. These shifts are path-dependent. Once a new equilibrium is established, removing the initial policy will not return the system to its previous state. Short-term evaluations often label a policy as a failure because they measured the progress right before the system reached its critical tipping point. Policy interventions operate in open, adapting landscapes that are in a continuous state of motion. This reality challenges the reliance on randomized controlled trials as a universal gold standard for evaluation. A randomized controlled trial requires a closed environment to isolate a control group. In a complex adaptive system, the subjects inside a control group will observe and react to the surrounding ecosystem. This spillover effect makes it difficult to claim isolated linear causality for interconnected social problems. You cannot standardize an intervention when the environment itself is constantly evolving. Complexity requires an upgrade to our analytical tools and evaluation methodologies. Participatory system mapping allows evaluators to work with stakeholders to draw the network and locate its hubs before beginning the evaluation. We are also moving toward configurational approaches, shifting away from simple attribution models. These approaches search for the specific combinations of context and systemic levers that allow an intervention to succeed. The question becomes, what configuration of feedback loops and local hubs made this outcome possible here, and can it be replicated? Assessing interconnected social and environmental goals requires we look past the straight line and measure the behavior of the system itself.